Oh, I think we're live. Awesome. Hello there. Welcome to the 6th Round Retro. I'm your host, Eddie Mercado with BloodyElbow.com, joined, of course, by Fraser Coffey, also of BloodyElbow.com. Fraser, how are you, sir?
I am good. Eddie, how are you doing today?
I'm doing well. I'm doing well. Preparing for the holidays coming up. Crazy time of the year. Everyone's running around, wrapping presents and getting gifts at the last minute and all that. So it was nice to kind of get away from that hustle and bustle and flash back to, I don't know, Pride 33 from February 24th, 2007. Super excited about this card. This was a very important Pride. So this was Pride's second go at the United States. They had Pride 32, which was in Las Vegas, and then they came back with Pride 33, called the Second Coming. Crazy, crazy card as a whole, and crazy significant. This was a lot of people call it the death of Pride. Now, yeah, they did have a show, one more show after this. They went back to Japan, but for as far as I'm concerned, and a lot of people, this was their last really big show before selling the company off to the UFC, to Zuffa, to the Fertitas, and then ultimately just going away.
Yeah, so this is, exactly. So this is February 2007. The Zuffa would buy Pride 1 month later, almost 1 month to the day after this, at the end of March. And there was a lot of discussion for a while about what exactly Zuffa would do once they purchased Pride. I think that there was an idea that they would keep it running for a while, and we weren't sure. They did put on one card that was basically an old Pride show. It felt like a Pride show, but a tiny bit off, and that's Pride 34. So that was in April, and then that was it. It was closed. So you're right. In a lot of ways, this one really feels like the actual final Pride card. And then the Pride 34 that came after this is sort of like the little footnote at the end for completists out there, which of course is us, because we are those completists. So I'm sure at some point we'll cover that. But for now, I think if you wanted to look at this as the last true, honest to goodness Pride show, you could. But the thing that's great about it is that even if it didn't have that kind of historical significance, I think it's a show we'd be covering on this show anyway, because it's just a really good event.
Yeah, and it did have historical significance in as far as the fighters were concerned in the fights themselves. But what made this different from a lot of the other Pride shows is, well, aside from being inside of the United States, but they didn't have the Pride rules for this. They adopted the unified rules and dropped the elbows. They said, we don't want the elbows, so you have no soccer kicks, no face stomps, no knees to a grounded opponent, no elbows. So, I mean, that was, I don't know, that was maybe my least favorite rule set that Pride's ever done, I would say. They also did 3 5-minute rounds instead of the 10-minute opening round, and all that. So it was a little bit different. It was Pride watered down a little bit for the United States. And of course the judging was 10-point must, which is a lot different from the way that the regular old school Pride cards were judged.
Yeah, it is. It's a lot of slightly different things. It's a little bit jarring in that regard. But the very first show that you and I did for the 6th Round Retro was on Pride 1, and there, one of the things that we talked about is that Pride they were always a little funky with their rules, and that they always had a willingness to kind of be like, let's adjust the rules a little bit for this fight. I mean, that was the thing that at the beginning, that first card, the rules were all over the place, and they got more consistent over the years. But there still would be times where just randomly they would have like one kind of weird fight where they were doing something weird, or there was the stuff about if the opponent weighed X number of pounds above, then the smaller guy could decide if he wanted to allow knees on the ground or not. They just had some weird stuff like that. And so I think this one, it does feel a little a tiny bit unpride-ish in a way, but in a way that's almost sort of true to the spirit of what Pride was right from the get-go, which is sort of just, do what works today.
Yeah, but this still had the spectacle. I mean, this looked
Absolutely.
like a Pride event. Like, this went on in Las Vegas, but you wouldn't have known it. Like, if you were just happened to order on pay-per-view and no one said anything about it being in the States, you'd have thought it was at the Saitama Super Arena. I mean, everything, the whole production value was there. I mean, from the amazing entrances to the crazy screaming Pride lady that everyone has come to love, where she just over pronounces everybody's name. And like, Bruce Buffer is amazing right now, right? Like, he is excellent at what he does. But at that time, he was still trying to find himself. The Pride lady, the crazy Pride lady, really was killing it in terms of announcing at that time.
Yeah, I'm thrilled she's there. Lenny Hart, you got to give a shout out to her. She's a staple of Pride, and you're right, she's there, and she gives it that big atmosphere. I totally agree. It feels like it's got the spectacle. It feels like you're in Japan in a way. Until you cut to the crowd and you see Nicolas Cage there and Chuck Norris and all of our locals hanging out. But yeah, I like that they brought the spectacle, that they had the same sort of fighter intros that they've always had in Pride. They didn't really compromise the value of what they looked like and what the feel of the organization was, even though they were in Vegas.
Yeah, I think I saw Harrison Ford floating around there also. I have no idea how they got him there. I don't think I've ever seen him anywhere outside of a movie.
He seems a little too grumpy to normally attend things, but he did. He, came out for Pride. Good on him.
Yeah, he actually got a pretty big ovation from the crowd. They when they were playing the national anthem, they cut to him, and everyone, the place went wild for Harrison Ford. Go figure.
Yeah,
Vegas loves Harrison Ford, I guess. I don't know. But there were a couple canceled bouts. A couple bouts that fizzled out. Gilbert Ival, who we know and love from, well, I don't know about love, but he's infamous, notorious for knocking out referees, for being somewhat of a dirty fighter. He was supposed to fight Sergei Kharitonov, but the Nevada State Athletic Commission just banned Gilbert Ival. They said, no, he's just not civilized enough, basically, to fight for Vegas. So that was canceled. Kazuhiro Nakamura was going to fight Travis View. Nakamura had to pull out with an injury. Wes Sims, who we know from early UFC days and face stomping Frank Mir, in the UFC cage, he was supposed to fight Fujita. That bout fell through, and then Wes Sims was supposed to fight Mark Hunt, and that also fell through because the Athletic Commission ruled the bout uncompetitive. So we didn't get to see Wes Sims in Pride 33. So
they probably should have just pulled the trigger and gone with Wes Sims versus Gilbert Ival, which would have been guaranteed to end in a DQ. There was no prayer of a Sims versus Ival fight going and actually having some sort of logical finish.
Well, the only way to, I guess, get around the whole DQ, the inevitable DQ, would be to just scrap the rules altogether and maybe put like a top on the cage somehow. So,
yeah, it'd be genius. I don't understand why nobody ever made that happen.
Yeah, it would have been good. But man, this card, it was so good. So many finishes, only one decision. I mean, top to bottom, exciting card and so much relevancy. I mean, this was Dan Henderson became a 2-division champion in Pride. And that's a big deal. He won the welterweight title and he won the middleweight title. And, and he was, I will never forget just this. I have this image of Dan Henderson just walking around with 2 Pride belts on him. And just, it's like, man, this dude is the man. It was such an awesome, just an iconic moment seeing him with 2 belts. But also, I mean, on top of that, you had, well, that was a rematch. And then you had another rematch, Alistair Overeem and Shogun. And this was the last time we saw last time we saw Alistair Overeem weighing in at 205 pounds. That's right, ladies and gentlemen. Alistair Overeem used to fight at 205 pounds. Like, that's insane. And of course, one of the greatest lightweight fights of all time, Nick Diaz and Takanori Gomi absolutely battled it out in one of the greatest 155-pound fights I've ever seen, even though it was at 160, whatever. And a prospect, we had Sokuju, who came in with a lot of hype, fought Lil Nog and just showed up. So a lot of relevancy on the card. But as a whole, what would you think of recapping Pride 33?
Yeah, I mean, I agree. There's a lot of highlights on here. There's a lot of good moments, things to get excited about, things to get pumped up. One of the things that I feel like the card does really well, and this was a common trait in a lot of Pride shows, is that it builds so well. You know, like the matches that maybe aren't. I mean, they're it's a good card overall, but if there's matches that aren't quite as good, they're early, and they get better. And they get bigger, and like, you know, it really feels like every single one is getting greater. I think in a way that's sort of, you know, like I said, that's always kind of been a part of Pride. I feel like in a way that's their, you know, they've got a lot of ties in the early days to Japanese pro wrestling. And I feel like that's sort of their pro wrestling mentality there, that like, you know, you build to the main event. And it's great. I mean, it just feels like there's a sort of crescendo that goes throughout. And then by the time you get to, especially the final two matches, the Diaz Gomi and the Wanderlei and Hendo, you know, you're just bouncing off the walls because like you've just reached this fever pitch, and both of those just completely deliver in this huge way. So yeah, it's great.
Yeah, such a rising action to this. It's just up, 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 and it's so climactic. It's like, yes, it's. I mean, you couldn't script this any better, honestly. Like, it was just epic, like epic. Everybody, if you are a mixed martial arts fan, you have to watch this card. Like, have to. Period. But let's get right into it. Let's dive right into this thing. Starting at the top, Dan Henderson defeated Wanderlei Silva, knocked him out with a bodacious left hook 2 minutes and 8 seconds into the third round, capturing the middleweight title, 205 pounds in Pride. And oh my goodness, so Hendo, he was known for his H-bomb at this time. Like, everyone knew, like, hey, this wrestler has developed his right hand. That's what you need to watch out for. But this was the coming out party for his left hand. Ooh. What'd you think of this one, man?
Yeah, this was good stuff. I mean, Wanderlei at the time, you know, he's the champ. At the time he was the only champion in that division that Pride had ever had. So there's only two ever. There's Wanderlei, there's Hendo, and that's it. And you know, Wanderlei had gone on that like crazy spree where he had just dominated a little bit of the shine. There was a tiny bit of shine that was off him here, just a tiny bit, because he had lost to Ricardo Arona, but then he came back and beat Arona. So you know, he's still, you know, he's Wanderlei. And you know, Hendo really does a good job of shutting him down, of, you know, of grinding him out, of really taking him out of his game. And there's a great point, I think, at the beginning of the third round, the one where it ends, where one of the people on the commentary team, I can't remember which one, says, you know, you can really judge how a fight's going by the fighter's eyes. And Wanderlei looks scared, and it's really true. Or, you know, maybe scared is not the right word, but he's, you can tell that he is like, oh man, this is bad. And it's true, because Hendo is just not to be denied here. And it's great. I think it's an amazing performance from Dan Henderson. It's just incredible. He wins a second belt. He's the man to finally, after years, defeat Wanderlei. He does it in this dramatic fashion by knocking him out. It's great. It's a great moment. And as a guy who's been a Hendo fan for a long time, it's you know, one of the real highlights of his career.
Yeah, it was an epic moment, just absolutely epic. And you had Henderson came in after a decision win over Vitor Belfort. And then you had Wanderlei, who came in, and yes, he was like his 5th title defense or something crazy like that. But he also was fighting at heavyweight. So before this, he fought Mirko Cro Cop and got Cro Copped. He got kicked in the head, knocked out. But that was a rematch. And so, you know, he looked a little gun shy out there against Henderson. But I mean, you're 5 months removed from getting kicked in the head by Cro Cop. You know, what do you expect? Of course, you're going to be a little gun shy. But Wanderlei had very few moments in the entire bout. So in the last 10 seconds of the opening round, you know, he actually started landing his hooks. He hurt Dan Henderson a little bit, had him on the ropes, but the round expired. End of the second round, the entire second round, he really did absolutely nothing. Absolutely nothing. And then last 10 seconds, he throws up an armbar attempt. It was really half-hearted. and nothing really came of it. Round 2, that's all she wrote. Henderson threw a sneaky spinning back fist that wobbled Wanderlei, sent him stumbling, rolls up, lands his right hand. He got Wanderlei to crack the smile, and then Henderson threw a left hook, right hand, and then the left hook is what connected, knocking Wanderlei out on impact. He fell backwards, head bounced, and then the worst part of all, Henderson came down with the hammer. The same hammer he dropped on Michael Bisping when he knocked him out. And that was, number 1, brutal. Like, brutal as it gets. And number 2, unnecessary. Wanderlei was already unconscious. I mean, it's one of those hard-to-watch kind of moments. The brutality is just, it's pretty severe here.
It's true. And I have to admit, I've seen this fight before, but I had forgotten about that. You see highlights of the KO a lot. I had actually forgotten about that final punch there. And it was interesting. You're right. It is like literally the exact same thing as the Bisping one. And some people gave Hendo some flack over the Bisping one. Not as many, because a lot of people don't like Bisping, and we're sort of, contented with that. But, 2 times Henderson, like twice you do that. It's maybe not the best. I agree.
Yeah, but I think he just didn't like Bisping, and I don't think he liked Wanderlei either.
I do not.
I think there was bad blood there, and I think that's the thing. Is like, you don't want bad blood with Dan Henderson, or that's that's the end result.
Yeah, and it's interesting. I mean, this really, like you said, Wanderlei, he had the Crow Cobb. He'd been up at heavyweight and hadn't had as much success there. But he, this is the end of the line for him in Pride. His next fight is the Chuck fight in the UFC. And, I think though he's had some success in the UFC, I mean, he had a couple of good moments in the UFC, but overall, this is it. I really kind of think, there's only the sporadic moment of the old Wanderlei here. There's only the sporadic moment of the old Wanderlei in this fight. So yeah, he's this is the end of the line for the true axe murderer.
It's true. It's true. But there were flashes of brilliance. So he went on. He won 4 of his next 10, which is not very good actually. But those fights were epic and they were brutal. And I think his fight with Chuck was probably his real last hurrah. And then the fights he won after that, I think, were just really favorable matchups. And like his fight with who was it? Keith Jardine.
Yeah.
Oh man, that was one of the most brutal knockouts I've ever seen. He was holding him by his throat and just like, ah! That was crazy. That looked like the Wanderlei of old.
Well, he also had that great one.
Brian Stan.
Brian Stan, exactly. Which is all about Brian Stan being like, you know what? I'm just going to go out there and let Wanderlei Silva have a Wanderlei Silva fight, and I'm just going to see how it goes. And that's an amazing moment of him just. And I think that's all on Stan, just being willing to say like, we're in Japan. Let's do this. Let's pride it up. Yeah.
Yeah, and I really thought they were both going to end on that note. That was Brian Stan's final fight, and I thought that was going to be Wanderlei's last fight. USADA came around, and then that was really the end of Wanderlei in the UFC.
No, that was his last fight. He never fought again. We know that he went out on an amazing high note. That was the end of his career. We never have any reason to think of anything that happened in Wanderlei's career after that point. That was it. He rode off to another planet, never to be seen again.
If only that were the case. But as everybody knows, no one ever really goes out on a win and stays out on a win. Yeah, so he fought Chael Sonnen this year, back in June, and he lost a decision in what I call the senior circuit. That was his first fight on the senior circuit, I'll say. So he's 0-1 in the senior circuit. I guess he's still on the Bellator roster. Will he fight again? I don't know. Do I want to see him fight again? Not necessarily. Unless it's someone of his caliber. And I mean, past their prime severely, maybe even just a grappling match. Like, I could be down for that.
Fedor? Come on, Fedor. Fedor and Bellator. All pride super fight. Wanderlei versus Fedor. They've thought about it. They've at least considered it.
So just hearing this, I'm instantly afraid for the health of Wanderlei Silva, which is good, a nice change of pace, because I've been concerned for the health of Fedor for his past couple of fights.
Sure.
So, that probably actually makes a lot of sense, unfortunately. Yeah. As long as they do not put Wanderlei in the heavyweight tournament, please. That's like the last thing I need to see out here.
Yes.
But Hendo, man, he went on to have a pretty successful career himself. He already had a successful career up to this point, winning 2 belts, one in 2 different divisions. Then he goes on to Strikeforce, wins the 205-pound title there. He knocks out Fedor Emelianenko, which is one of the trophy of trophies as far as a mixed martial artist goes. And he went over to the UFC and had some awesome fights, knocking out Bisping, which was one of the greatest knockouts of all time. On top of this one, his knockout of Hector Lombard. I mean, he just continued to show up. Not to mention his epic fight with Shogun. Holy crap. His fight with Shogun, their first fight, amazing. Second fight, amazing. Like, Dan Henderson was the man. And as far as I'm concerned, and I'm going to go out on a limb here, he retired as the middleweight champion in my eyes. Yeah, he lost a decision in his last fight to Michael Bisping in the middleweight title, but I think he won that fight. I scored it for Dan Henderson. So in my eyes, and no one can tell me different, Hendo retired as the UFC middleweight champion.
I think that's fair. I think, he's got a lot of stuff in the record books. Final Pride champ in 2 different divisions. He, like you said, he had that epic war, especially the first one. That fight with Shogun was just, man, it was just crazy. And that's a big fight because Shogun had won the final Pride GP in the middle with the light heavyweight, but the middleweight division. And he, so Shogun and Hendo meeting in the UFC, in a way, it was sort of like it's what would have clearly come next in Pride had Pride stayed around. Like, no doubt about it. If Pride had not gone under, Dan Henderson's first title defense would have been against Shogun Rua. So, we eventually do get that in UFC, and it's incredible. It's amazing. The thing I'll say for Dan Henderson, as we look at his career, you always get especially when Conor won the lightweight title from Eddie Alvarez last year, there was all the talk about, people who have held 2 belts, BJ Penn, Randy Couture, Conor McGregor. Dan Henderson should be on that list. He doesn't get the credit because they were Pride belts, but come on. Anytime you're making that list of the people who have held belts in multiple divisions, if somebody's not including Dan Henderson on that list, you add Dan Henderson to the list because he should be on there.
Yeah, you need to go back and watch this card, do your homework, and then rejoin that conversation and school everyone and be like, but Dan Henderson.
Exactly. And simultaneous. So there you go.
Yeah, exactly. And oh man, just him with the 2 belts is it's an iconic moment. It's an iconic moment. Okay, so before that, another iconic match, perhaps the greatest lightweight bout of all time, if not one of them. Definitely top 10, probably top 5, a lot of people's top 3 even. So Nick Diaz, brother of Nate Diaz, for those who, well, if you're watching this show, you know who Nick Diaz is. I had a girlfriend once who was like, I mentioned Nick Diaz, and she was like, "Is that Nate's brother?" And I was like, "Wow, things have changed. Things have really changed."
Oh, Nate is Nick's brother.
Yeah.
To this day, as far as I'm concerned, Nate is Nick's brother. Sorry,
exactly. Yeah. So this is Nick Diaz. He's Nick Diaz. Everyone knows what you get with Nick Diaz is, he talks his crap like in the ring. He comes to fight. He's looking to bang. He's got this insane gas tank that is just really hard to deal with. He's got this volume that's really hard to deal with and just kind of accumulates over time. And he's taking on Pride's, poster child for their lightweight division. Takanori Gomi, he was, Mr. Pride at lightweight. He was this fun, energetic, unassuming. Like you look at him and you're not like, oh, this guy's a threat, but he comes out just throwing heat, like just throwing some really, really heavy punches. And they got it on in Las Vegas in a really epic back and forth bout. Gomi came out hot right off the bat, throwing heat, hurting Diaz, dropping him. Diaz comes back at the end as Gomi slows down, and it's just this back and forth match that's super crazy. Round 2, Diaz is still full of energy. He's all busted up, and he's got a giant gash under his eye, and oh man, it's just a crazy, crazy, crazy fight.
It is so good. It is such a good fight. I was surprised at how, because I had watched this one a long time ago. I was surprised at reminding myself how good this fight is. It's great. Yeah, the end of the first round where Diaz starts, I mean, Diaz gets dropped in the first round, and Gomi celebrates a little bit thinking that he's just won the fight, but Diaz, it's very hard to stop him. So he gets right back up, and they go right back at it. And then end of the first round, Diaz is just unloading on Gomi, unloading on him. And Gomi's just hands down, kind of a little sort of cheapy Mayweather sort of thing that's not really working all that well. He's just exhausted. And then it leads to that amazing finish that's just a finish for the ages as Diaz just cinches him up and puts him away. It's great. It's such a good fight. Yeah.
It's super nuts. So the cardio abandoned Gomi as it usually does. And he shoots in on Diaz, and Diaz right away wraps up a go-go plata. Not an omoplata, a go-go plata. So the omoplata, you wrap your leg over, from full guard, you bring your own leg up and you hold it, and then you try to wrap it over their shoulder, and you basically do a Kimura with your legs. Well, the go-go plata is you bring your leg up, and then you slide your instep of your shin right under their throat. And then with your other two hands, you almost do like a can opener, and you pull their throat into your shin, basically, and then you wrap your other leg on top just for extra leverage. And this never happens in mixed martial arts. I don't think it's happened since. Like, this is a super, super rare move that rarely ever happens. And to see this pulled off on such a big stage in a high-profile fight was absolutely bananas. And in a fight where, I mean, Diaz, he took some serious punishment in that fight. Like, he got hit with some really, really heavy strikes. So he had to overcome adversity, and what an insane, insane win. I mean, crazy win. And I'll never forget just them hoisting him up, and you just see Diaz with his hands raised and his face bleeding, and it was just an epic fight, and an epic fight.
It's a great moment. The go-go plata, you're right. It's a crazy move. It's not one you expect to see. It's the Undertaker's finisher, wrestling fans. So there you go. But yeah, it's really an amazing thing. And now one of the interesting things here that we have to, of course, talk about is, like you said, it's a great win for Nick Diaz, except it's not, because Nick Diaz would go on to test positive for marijuana and have the result ruled a no contest. So officially in the books, Nick Diaz did not defeat Takanori Gomi. It went to a no contest. And that's a really key. It doesn't really have much of an impact on watching the fight, because, it's, that's all later. Like, we don't learn any of that night. So, that's, the night of it, it's not a factor. But an interesting piece of that is that, Nick Diaz is this sort of like mythical figure at this point, today in MMA. And at this time, when he's taking on Gomi here, the sort of myth of Diaz was growing, but it wasn't quite all the way there. This is really one of the major fights that establishes that wild, like, persona of his, because it's got everything for your classic Diaz performance. It's got him coming back from behind. It's got him busting out this just insane thing that you never see in a fight ever. And then for all of his sort of 420 fans, of which he has many, then he tests positive for marijuana and gets it taken away, which sort of, in the eyes of many, makes him this kind of crazy, like, cult hero. So, like, this fight is like quintessential in the mythology of Nick Diaz and the Diaz brothers. So this is I think, to me, almost ground zero in making him into something beyond what he had been before.
Yeah, this was huge. This was paramount in the Nick Diaz mythology, like you said. And I think it really started with him knocking out Robbie Lawler. He did that.
That's a great one.
Caught everyone's attention, and then this was just like, whoa. like Nick Diaz is like the so you know what we need to do? We need to come up with this unofficial decisions show or something where we recap all the decisions and all the you know, for the hardcore fans, the real deal, such as John Jones did not lose to Mark Hamill. Michael Bisping did not beat Dan Henderson.
Yeah.
Nick Diaz beat Takanori Gomi. You know, like there needs to be some sort of unofficial decisions or results that, because there's quite a few of things like that where, you know, where technicalities kind of don't tell the tale.
It's true. It's true. And you're right. I mean, you know, Diaz did have that great win over Robbie Lawler years back, you know, that is a great thing that really buoyed him. But, you know, he also then had a pretty bad, not bad, that's not too strong to say, but he had a 3-fight skid in the UFC before this. He lost to Diego Sanchez and Joe Riggs and Sean Shirk all in order. You know, Diego was really red hot at that time, and Shirk would go on to win the title. But, you know, Joe Riggs, like Sean Sharp with his very short little arms, like, you know, Diaz was not looking great at that point. And, you know, he sort of had seemed like he might be kind of a middling kind of guy. And this was a real key moment for him, because if you only know Takanori, we're talking a lot about Diaz, but it's important to say, if you only know Takanori Gomi from his UFC run, then, you know, it's hard to impress upon folks like what a big deal he was in Pride. He was great. He was the #1 lightweight in the world. He was in the world, not in Pride, because there was no question back at this time. There's not even up for debate that Pride was the better company as far as the lightweight division go. You'd be laughed out of any conversation if you suggested that the UFC had a better lightweight division back here than Pride. And Gomi was the man in there. He was at the very top. And we kind of said, you know, Wanderlei sort of, you know, was kind of at the end. This is undeniably the end of the line for Takanori Gomi. He would, after this, went on to Sengoku, where he went 2-2, had a couple other little ones, went to the UFC. I mean, you know, I mean, what has he had? He had like the Tyson Griffin KO in the UFC. I can't think of another highlight from him. This is it. But prior to this, he was the man. He was the #1 lightweight in the world, and Diaz took him down.
Yeah, it was crazy. So Gomi came in 27-3, 13-1 in Pride, and just that was it. This was the end of it. You know, this was the end of the line for him. And he actually left the UFC on a 5-fight losing skid, all losing in the first round, I believe. So, or at least he was finished in all 5 of those fights. I think the saddest part is he's actually fighting in Risen on New Year's Eve. So he's I don't know if he's going over there for maybe his retirement fight or if he's still going or what the case is. But if you want to watch him fight, he will be getting it in on New Year's Eve. So
yeah. But yeah, he's a great one, and this is a good ending for it. Fantastic fight, must watch fight. You know, if there's only one fight, you should watch this whole card. But if there's only one fight you watch off the card, it's this one.
Yeah, for sure. So before that, another epic fight, another rematch. We had Mauricio Shogun Rua defeating Alistair Overeem for the second time by knockout due to ground strikes for the second time. This came at 3 minutes and 37 seconds of the opening round. Man, so this is first we have to address the elephant in the room. Overeem at 205 is a weird sight, okay? He has it looks like he's supposed to be at 205. So to envision him at heavyweight now it's so mind-boggling because they don't even look like the same person. Well, the head's the same. I'll give him that. Like his head didn't get any bigger, but like the surrounding everything else just got extreme after this fight, actually. So like after he got knocked out, he went on this crazy bench pressing scheme where he just got super swole and then just completely changed his game up. And actually, it served him well, oddly enough. But this fight here, you know, looked a lot like their first bout. Overeem working his boxing, working his head movements. But Shogun finds a way to get top position and then kind of just stands over Overeem and dives on him with all his weight and knocks him out with one punch, and finished up with some academic ground strikes, and that was it. So this was almost like deja vu for Shogun Rua.
Yeah, Shogun is an absolute monster at this time. You know, he's, like I mentioned before, he'd won the Pride middleweight Grand Prix not long before this. He was almost undefeated in Pride. He did have a loss to Mark Coleman that was a little bit of a fluky injury kind of thing. I don't want to take away from Coleman there. I said a little bit. I'm not, this is not totally a Matt Hamill, John Jones, but it's a little funky. So he was coming in here, and I mean, he's just a destroyer. He's an absolute beast, an absolute killer. I love the ending because it's great. We talked about in the beginning that since they're in Vegas, they are under the Nevada State Athletic Commission and their rule set, which means no stomps, no soccer kicks. And that was Shogun's bread and butter at this time. He was just nobody in the history of the game has been as terrifying in the way that they use stomps and soccer kicks as Shogun Rua. I mean, he was like terrifying.
Mr. Soccer kick, even.
Yeah, I mean, it was scary. And so the end of this is great because you got Overeem on the ground and Shogun's by his feet, and Shogun kind of like spreads Overeem's legs a little bit, and that's the point where in any other Shogun fight that foot comes through and just blasts you in the face and you're unconscious. But he's in Vegas. And so he can't. And there is this kind of moment of sort of hesitation of Shogun being like, ugh. And so he just dives on him and just knocks him out with his hand instead. You're like, no, that's fine.
That works too.
Yeah, it's great. And as a sort of a theme on this card, obviously since it's the end of Pride, this is also Shogun's last fight in Pride. He would then his next fight here is when he's in the UFC against Forrest Griffin. Yeah.
Yeah. And Shogun, I got to be honest, I didn't know how well he was going to do in the UFC, but he's actually been around for a really long time in the UFC now, which is pretty crazy to think about. But he went on to win the belt from Lyoto Machida, which was pretty cool. And I mean, he had a decent career. He had those epic wars with Dan Henderson, came up short in the second one pretty bad. He got his nose just completely shattered. But Shogun was fun to watch. He's still fun to watch. He still fights. He's still like ranked, somewhere in the top 205ers.
Top 10, I think, somewhere in the top 10.
He's number 6. He's the number 6 light heavyweight in the world, and
there you go.
On a 3-fight winning streak. So that's pretty crazy that he's still going, considering he's been fighting since 2002.
Yeah, and serious, heavy-duty fights. He's taking some punishment in there. Listen, here's the deal with Shogun. I am an unabashed fan of Shogun. I will go to the bat for that guy. And here's why, to me, Shogun deserves all the credit in the world. Because at this time, at this exact moment of Pride 33, he was the top light heavyweight in the world. He had won that Pride GP. He was, a feared man. He was the number 1 in the world, period. Pride ends. He has a couple knee injuries. He has to go to the UFC because there's no Pride anymore. So he has to switch his game from being in a ring to a cage. He's got to deal with these injuries. He's got to deal with a new rule set that, like I said, takes away what was his clear primary weapon with the kicks and the stomps and everything like that. It's a total readjustment for him. And what does he do? He becomes the number 1 light heavyweight in the world again. That's amazing. And just an absolutely incredible accomplishment to hit that point, to be knocked all the way down, to have to completely change so much up, and yet to get back up to that top again. It's great.
It really is. It really is. He is a Hall of Famer for many promotions, which is crazy. And his run was just phenomenal. It's still going on. I'm talking about it like it's done. Like, he's still going on. A 3-fight winning streak in the UFC, number 6 in the world. But oddly enough, he is the guy who lost the belt to John Jones, that sent John Jones on his crazy title reign that I don't know what he's doing. He got stripped or what. I don't know what he's doing now. But so he kind of passed the baton, so to speak, in terms of the number 1 light heavyweight in the world.
Yeah.
And it hasn't changed. despite all the John Jones's mistakes or whatnot. Overeem, on the other hand, this was really the fight where he realized that he wanted to get super huge and started his Ubereem kick and went super huge and went on to win the Strikeforce heavyweight title and currently the number 2 heavyweight in the UFC. Mixed results in the UFC, kind of known for being a glass cannon, one of the worst chins in MMA. I mean, a lot of people joke around and say he has a middleweight chin. He was at 205 and had a middleweight chin, and now he's at heavyweight and still has a middleweight chin. And he's probably still unconscious from that Francis Ngannou uppercut that dusted him a couple of weekends ago.
Yeah, it was bad.
But I love Alistair Overeem. He came into the UFC and just like a freak of nature, had some run-ins with performance enhancers. No shocker there. But, I mean, I'm such an Alistair Overeem fan. I really am. I really wanted him to see – I wanted to see him win the UFC heavyweight title, but I don't – that's not going to happen now.
Probably not. But, yeah, and as a longtime kickboxing guy, I have to point out that after this fight here and as he starts to bulk up that he makes this big run in K1 where he had a lot of success and did very, very well in K1. It was one of the top 5, probably top 3 heavyweights for a period of time with them. Top 4. We'll give him top 4.
And probably the number 1 reinvention of oneself in combat sports that I can think of.
Yeah, absolutely.
Crazy story.
Yeah.
Well, let's move on. So before that, we had Sergei Kharitonov defeat Mike Russo by submission, a nice armbar he caught from the bottom of guard at 3 minutes and 46 seconds of the opening round. Now, Sergei came in 13-3, hot stuff. I mean, at this point, he's already had wins over Fabricio Verdum, Pedro Hizzo, Semi Shield, Ninja Hua, brother of Shogun. And also, he came in with some, I think, on the heels of back-to-back losses. So, it was like, this guy's really good. He's a veteran. He's been there, but he's suffered some tough losses going against a guy who, severely outclassed, or I don't want to say outclassed, but just he gave up a huge experience disadvantage there. He only had 4 fights professionally. He was a Division I wrestler at Illinois State or Eastern Illinois State, but I mean, he was still very, very raw with his skill set. Like he could throw a right hand. He had an abundance of knowledge in the takedowns, but that was really all he was coming into to pride with at this point. But I think he did good for considering his lack of experience and his lack of tools. I think he did relatively well against a much more experienced Kharitonov, even though, Sergei, he took his arm home. Yeah.
I mean, Russo, you're right. He's got a limited tool set. He does pretty well with it, though. He gets Kharitonov down. He passes to the side very quickly. He gets the mount, but he ultimately leaves himself open. Russo seems like the kind of guy that would have been so dominant in the UFC 14 tournament. He would have crushed that UFC 14 field. But here, he does do well. I don't want to downplay that. He does a decent job here. He leaves his arm in there. He gets tapped, which leads to a really weird ending where Russo is complaining to the referee after the fight. And it was hard to figure out exactly what he was complaining about because he taps a lot. He taps in 2 different places. It's very clear that he taps, but he's really unhappy about the stoppage. I don't know. Were you able to figure out what his beef was there? What's going on?
It was inconclusive, but what I was thinking, maybe the only logical thing I could think of was maybe that Sergei may have grabbed his glove somewhere in the process, perhaps. But I mean, you got armbarred, bro, and that was the thing. So. Russo, like you said, he was doing well. He was landing his right hand. He was getting takedowns, and he stacks Kharitonov and starts to throw down punches, but leaves his arm hanging out. And Kharitonov throws up this lazy armbar attempt that was super, there was so much space in there. And all Russo really had to do was just kind of drop back down into guard, and he would have been okay. But Russo tries to pull his arm out, thus extending his own arm and basically put himself in the armbar. He could have gotten out of it, but I just think his lack of knowledge of jiu-jitsu is what did him in there. And he screamed, he tapped, and Kharitonov looked phenomenal.
Yeah. And it's funny, too, because the announcers spend a good chunk of the fight talking about how Kharitonov is so uncomfortable off of his back, and this is his weakest spot. And he's on his back. He's totally screwed. And then he subs him from his back. Kharitonov's a good fighter. I feel like he's a guy who, I've got a soft spot in my heart for him. I feel like he never quite made it to that very upper echelon, like that real highest level, but was just barely outside. He's a really good, solid all-around heavyweight who's been around for a long time and had a lot of good successes.
Yeah, he went on and he did some pretty good things. He avenged his loss to Overeem, knocked him out. He knocked out Andrei Arlovsky, which was cool. Went on, he fought Josh Barnett in Strikeforce. He actually signed with Bellator for a little bit there and suffered a really bad knockout. And I actually was there at cage side in person for that. And that kind of left a bad taste in my mouth. I didn't like seeing that.
Yeah.
But he is on a 3-fight winning streak, winning all 3 of those fights. So, he's still around. He's over at M1 doing the Russian thing. But the craziest thing is Russo, man. So he goes back to the Illinois regional circuit and he wins 4 straight UFC fights, including a crazy come-from-behind knockout of Todd Duffy. Straight knocks him out with 1 punch at UFC 114. Awesome fight. Go check that out. But yeah, he ended up 15-3, I believe, overall. Lost his last 2 UFC fights and, called it a career with a pretty decent, unsuspecting 15-3 record.
Yeah, solid overall record for Russo. He had a good run in the UFC. He carved out a respectable career for himself. So props to him. And you're right, Kharitonov, still sort of kicking around. Kharitonov also, like Overeem, went a bit after this, made a little transition to kickboxing for a while. He did pretty well, not as well as Overeem, but he had a solid kickboxing run himself. So yeah, both of these guys obviously did well.
Yeah, pretty decent fight. A short fight too, so might as well go and watch it. Okay, so before that, Hayato Sakurai defeats Mac Danzig with a beautiful 1-punch knockout at 4 minutes and 1 second into the opening round. What'd you think of that knockout?
Powerful knockout. Sakurai's he's one of those kind of scary guys at this time who's capable of some real violence in there. And it took him a tiny bit to get there, but after a little bit, he unleashed that violence, and it was tough. Put Danzig down. It was an impressive KO and a solid performance from Maha Sakurai.
Yeah, Sakurai just really outclassed Danzig here. And, he was ripping to the body, just real beautiful the way he was disguising everything. Like man, this was a beautiful, beautiful performance. And Sakurai was 16-3 coming in. So much momentum behind him. And I mean, he just looked like a way superior fighter. And I mean, Danzig just really had nothing for him.
Yeah, Danzig's always been, I feel like Danzig's always been a guy who is capable of some good stuff, and he's definitely had some good wins. But is not somebody who has taken out the highest levels. And Sakurai's a fighter at this point in his career who's really at a very high level. And he's just a step above him. That's all there is to it.
Yeah, but Danzig, he did go on to win the Ultimate Fighter Season 6 and had a mixed results in the UFC. He went 5-8. And I think he won his last fight by submission. He submitted Joe Condon somewhere.
Yeah, outside the UFC, right? Yeah, because he goes on to Tough right after this. For immediately after this, he's in Tough and obviously wins that. And Sakurai, had some good moments as well. But yeah, Sakurai's a fun fighter. He's a guy who's capable of just uncorking some serious stuff in there. And he's got a really good, impressive highlight reel. A lot of fun stuff from him.
Speaking of highlight reels, woo! we saw Sokaju knock out Little Nog cold at 23 seconds of the opening round. Now, Sokaju, who, he came in as this prospect who, people had a lot of aspirations for. He came in 2-1, and I mean, he just showed up basically. He comes out like throwing these little kicks, and you're like, okay, what's going to happen here? Nogueira, of course, like insane amount of experience coming into this fight. 7-1 in Pride, 12-2 with his overall record. Already beat Dan Henderson, Sakurai, Guy Metzger, Overeem twice, Nakamura twice. So, I mean, there's no reason why anyone would be picking Sokaju over Nogueira here. But, Sokaju, he got Glover Teixeira for his second fight, and then Antonio Nogueira for his third fight. And that's tough money. But he showed up. He happened to unload this massive left hook that completely separated Nogueira from his senses, and that was a wrap. Yeah,
short, sweet, one of the all-time big upsets in Pride history, in MMA history. I mean, like you said, there's no reason to pick Sokaju in this fight, like none. And he just comes in and just gets it done, and it's violent and quick and very impressive. And then amazingly too, after this, he'd have a fight on that final Pride show, Pride 34, against Ricardo Arona, who is probably number 4 Pride middleweight at the time, behind Hendo and Shogun and Wanderlei. And so again, probably you wouldn't, even after this great performance over Little Nog, probably not a lot of people picking Sokaju, and he does it again and just takes, about a minute that time and knocks out Ricardo Arona. So he has a very, very short career in Pride of 2 fights that total less than 2 minutes on the final 2 shows. And yet what a career in those 2 minutes.
Yeah. And it's a little, bittersweet also, because he has this early success defeating these top names that he instantly got signed to the UFC. He instantly got thrown in there with the Wolves, and then he's fighting Lyoto Machida, and he's fighting Babalu, and he's fighting Musasi, and it almost seems like he just never really had a chance to develop, because right out of the gate he's fighting Glover Teixeira, he's fighting Lil Nog. So it's kind of a sad story. It kind of makes you wonder what could have been if he was maybe slow played a little bit more than what he was. I mean, I can't think of a bigger case of someone getting fed to the Wolves so soon, and that could be the reason of their career trajectory not being what we thought it was going to be.
I know what you mean. I mean, to think about the fact that in your second year as a pro, you go on a 4-fight streak of Glover Teixeira, Little Nog, Ricardo Arona, Lyoto Machida. That's lunacy. And you managed to go 2-2 in that 4-fight streak, PS. It's crazy. I mean, boxing gets a lot of flack for the way that they take too long to bring boxers up, and they do a lot of times take too long for that. But it does seem like a shame that there was not sort of a, somebody kind of, that his career was not sort of handled in a slightly different way to kind of help him kind of get brought up a little bit. I agree. He doesn't end his career. I mean, he's still fighting, but he's not going to ultimately end his career with, on paper, a very good record. This is the highlight of his career, clearly. It would have been interesting to see what would have happened had he been able to kind of, just build a little bit more and not be in that Shark Tank right away.
Yeah, absolutely. He actually got knocked out by Sergei Kharitonov back in June of this year, but did win his most recent fight by knockout back in October 28th. So, he's still fighting, doing his thing. But I mean, if you look at his record, it's there just is not any kind of real consistency there. I mean, his biggest winning streak was 3, and that only happened 1 time. So, kind of an odd tale, how a hyped up prospect kind of turned into this journeyman.
Yeah, and he's fought all sorts of crazy dudes too, like Houston Alexander and Bob Sapp. I mean, he fights some sort of funky guys out there. If he put together a couple good wins, he'd probably make a perfectly fine Bellator edition.
Oh
He's
man,
like a little 3-fight win streak, and he'll be right on board.
that's right. All right, so before that, we had James Lee defeated Travis View by submission. This was a good old-fashioned club and sub, 39 seconds into the opening round. This was a short notice fight. As we said, Nakamura had to pull out of this fight with Travis View. So this was a 2 weeks notice fight. And basically, Lee comes out. He drops View with a counter right hand and jumps on the sub and, gets the guillotine choke.
Yeah, not a lot to say about this one. View's an insanely well-traveled guy, has like 100 fights or so at this point in his, like today. It's just a guy who's been around, for ages, and, has fought everybody, like a ton of people. And he, I don't know if he took this lightly or, if what the deal was, but he, it went quick, and he ended up choked out, and that was that.
Yeah, so Lee, he finished his career 15-3, which is pretty respectable. He had one UFC fight. It was a TKO loss to Alessio Sakurai, who actually just fought for Bellator's middleweight title. He just got knocked out by a brutal elbow by Rafael Carvalho. So I believe Sakurai might be done after that one. But Travis View, on the other hand, he is actually fighting Wes Sims.
Wes Sims. See, it all comes back to Wes Sims.
He's fighting Wes Sims at Gender Wars in Russia, January 12th. Yeah, I said Gender Wars. There's going to be a man fighting a woman, apparently, which, I'm not exactly excited to see that. But I guess the headliner, if that ain't the headliner, then this will be the co-main, I suppose. So Travis View and Wes Sims are going to get it in. If anybody wants to see that for any reason, I don't personally.
All comes back to Wes Sims, baby. That's all there is. Yeah.
So before that, the only decision on the card, Frank Twinkle Toes Trigg. I had to say that because the announcers were just butchering Frank Twinkle Toes Trigg. It's a little bit of a tongue twister, but he defeated Kazuo Masaki by unanimous decision. Trigg basically using his wrestling here, trying to avoid the stand-up and just basically grinded out 3 rounds and did his best to not get knocked out.
Yeah, I mean, it's unfortunate. This was a little bit of a boring fight because you're right. It is just sort of your standard grindy wrestler performance, which is a shame because this is actually a really interesting, fascinating fight on paper. I mean, Trigg, Trigg is known for his great war with Matt Hughes. Dana White has called his favorite fight of all time. And Trigg's had some awesome fights in there. He's a very, very respectable fighter. Masaki is also really fantastic. Had won the Pride welterweight tournament. Would go on to have all kinds of really interesting fights, like against the likes of Akiyama and George Santiago. Masaki's, he's the real deal. He's a very good fighter. He just couldn't get it going in this fight. Trigg just, it was the case that we saw happening at times back in this era of MMA, where your Japanese fighters would go up against a just pure American wrestler, and they just did not. Sometimes they just did not have an answer for what a real American wrestling-based fighter brought to the table, and that's exactly what happened here. Trigg just out wrestled him, and Masaki had nothing. That's not because Masaki's a bad fighter. He's not. He just did not have the skill set in his toolbox to deal with the wrestling game of Frank Trigg.
Yeah, it's crazy because both of these guys came in with so much experience. Like the level of opposition between the two was just astounding. I mean, just really, really big, high-profile names. And Masaki doing work over in Pancrase, building up this crazy resume. Trigg over in the UFC, doing kind of decent. He lost to Matt Hughes. He lost to GSP. But, it was entertaining. Frank Trigg's fights were always entertaining. This just wasn't one of them.
No.
But, he did what he had to do to get the win. And afterwards, he joined the broadcast team to commentate. So I thought that was pretty unique, fighting and then commentating. That could have gone bad.
I appreciate that not only did he join the commentary team, but he took the time to get a suit on. He goes backstage, just showers, gets his suit, and comes back out and does the rest of the show. So very, very, very impressive. Yeah,
and Masaki actually he retired on a 3-fight winning streak, including Akira Shoji and Paul Daly. So that's how you go out like a boss.
Masaki's awesome. Masaki has so many great fights. Seriously, the George Santiago fights, the Akiyama fight, they're tremendous. Masaki rules. He's never going to get enough credit for how good he is. He's great. Love Masaki.
Yeah, absolutely. So before that, opening up the card, we have and kind of a one-sided domination here. We had Joachim Hansen defeated Jason Ireland by submission at 2:33 of round 1. I think it was a verbal submission too, which was pretty unique. This was just basically a good old-fashioned outclassing. Ireland came in after losing to some pretty big names, but didn't really have any big names on his record. Hansen already had 5 Pride bouts at this time, so we already knew what we were getting out of him. And, it was basically Hansen all the way. I mean, there was really there were like a very few moments, very, very few moments that Ireland had in this bout. He found top position a few times, but, I mean, ultimately, like, the end of the second round was so crazy. So Hansen goes for this armbar, and he's on the top, and he knows that time's about to expire. So instead of trying to crank for the armbar, he decides to hammer fist his opponent. And the referee is right there. So he starts hammer fisting and then looks at the referee as he's hammer fisting. So he's making eye contact with the referee and hammer fisting this dude in the face. And it was just this crazy moment. You're just like, man, this guy's a little crazy here. He's just staring into Steve Mazzagati's eyes as he's smashing this guy's face. It was a pretty cool moment. But went on to get the armbar, and pretty good performance from him.
Yeah, Joachim Hansen's great. He's Pride was always willing to book some fights to just showcase one dude, and this is one of these fights. They pretty clearly expected Hansen to win, and he does what he's here to do here. But yeah, he's a very good fighter. He had a fight a couple years before this against Kaol Uno that has a very soft spot for me, as that's kind of the fight that introduced me to the world of slightly obscure MMA. That's, it's not a UFC show. It's not a Pride show. And I remember finding that on, the internet back then and being like, whoa, there's a whole world out here that was great to sort of discover. But yeah, he has a really good performance here. He does what he needs to do. I think the end of this fight is actually really interesting. I've never quite seen something like this before, where Hansen gets Ireland in this armbar. And it's like the Kharitonov armbar. Hansen's on his back, and Ireland's above him, and gets the arm in, and he locks it in, and just clearly has it. And there's this really interesting sort of back and forth where the ref is right there, and Ireland's like, "No, I'm fine." And Hansen's like, and they're talking about it. Hansen's like, "Ref, you need to stop this or I'm going to break his arm." He's like, no, I'm totally fine. So Hansen just starts to apply some pressure, and he immediately taps out. And it's this interesting moment of Hansen, it's an interesting sort of martial artsy moment of Hansen knowing listen, I've got you right now. And I'm pausing before I do real damage to give you the option to tap out before I break your arm. And he basically tells him that. And Ireland's like, nah. So he starts to do it, and Ireland immediately freaks out. But it's a really interesting one of those kind of sort of noble samurai sort of moments in MMA of giving him the out.
Yeah, I mean, it was awesome. He was legit screaming, "I'm gonna break it! I'm gonna break it!"
Yeah.
And, looks to the ref. He's like, "Hey, you're gonna need to hurry up and stop this because I'm gonna break it." And it was insane sportsmanship. You gotta love that.
It's interesting. It made me think of the great, Frank Mir had that great thing that he always talked about, where he said, Frank Mir did not do that, and Frank Mir was always very clear about if I get your limb, I am going to break it. So you have got to tap out right away, because I'm not going to do what Hansen does here. I'm not
Well,
going to
that was with reason, to be fair. That's
Yeah.
the whole Tim Sylvia debacle where the fight was stopped because Sylvia's forearm actually snapped. So Herb Dean stopped it because of that. And the crowd was booing because they didn't understand. And then Frank was like, hey, don't boo me. Like, if you want me to rip it off, I'll rip it off. I just stopped because the ref said so. And that kind of created a monster, the monster that was Frank Mir. But I think the real opposite end of the spectrum would be Russo Paul Harris, how he you know, he will hold on after the referee's like trying to get him off and like injuring people. And so seeing something like this out of Hansen is just, it's beautiful because it's respect. It's, you know, it is martial arts. It's showing that this is a sport, and it's pretty boss to be like, hey, I'm giving you the easy out here. You can just cry uncle, or I will just slowly apply the pressure until you freak out and scream, you know, and scream uncle, basically.
And to be clear, I am pro Frank Mir's strategy as well, and I do not mean any insult to Frank Mir in that way, because I like how he approaches it here. I mean, I think part of the reason Hansen's able to do that in this fight is because he is steps above Ireland. Ireland's not getting out of that. You know, if Hansen was in there against, you know, I don't know, against like, you know, Nick Diaz, he probably wouldn't do that same thing because, you know, you give Diaz that pause and Diaz is going to figure out his way out of there. Ireland is not. Ireland is doomed. And so he can kind of, you know, play that game a little bit. But yeah, it was a cool ending and a very good performance from Hellboy.
Yeah, Ireland really did not go on to do anything of note. That was pretty much the end of his run. He had a couple King of the Cage performances. Hansen, on the other hand, he went on and did a bunch of fights in Dream. And yeah, I think he had his last fight in 2016, losing 4 of his last 5. So I think he is done.
Good run in Dream. His fight with Eddie Alvarez in Dream is one of the great Eddie Alvarez fights. So if you're an Eddie Alvarez fan and you've never seen that one, that's one to go check out. Yeah,
absolutely. All right. Well, let's go back up to the top and run through this card again. So we had Dan Henderson showing us that, you know what, he doesn't just have the H-bomb in the right, he has it in the left also. Left hooking left hooking Wanderlei Silva into unconsciousness, following up with the severely unnecessary hammer on top of that, winning 2 belts, picking up, you know, going down in the history books as someone who, you know, you score a title in 2 divisions, go on to another promotion, win another title. I mean, how can you not love Dan Henderson, right?
Absolutely. He's a great one.
Nick Diaz, epic lightweight bout with Takanori Gomi, one for the ages. You must watch it. After this, go watch it. I beg of you, please. You can find it everywhere. You can find it on Fight Pass. It's on YouTube. I mean, everywhere. You have to see this fight. You won't believe it. But just remember that it officially is a no contest. But as far as we're concerned, Diaz choked out Gomi with a go-go plata.
Yep.
Mauricio Shogun Hua, for the second time, knocking out Alistair Overeem at 205 pounds. The last time we saw Overeem at 205 pounds, Shogun being classic Shogun, being just a savage, a pure treat. Mr. Pride himself, Mr. Soccer Kick, relying on his soccer punches. We need to come up with a name for a punch from standing to the ground. We need like some sort of better term, something cool for that.
It's the Shogun, man. That's what it is.
Shogun. I'm with it. I'm definitely with it. We saw Sergei Kharitonov. He caught a slick armbar from the guard on a Division I American wrestler. Pretty cool. And seeing Sergei young and a little lighter than he is nowadays is kind of cool. Sakurai knocking out Danzig. That was epic. I mean, just a beautiful, well-placed overhand right. I mean, just it was awesome. And then you had Sokoju knocking out Little Nog. Like, what an insane punch that was. Another left hook. Like, this card was just phenomenal. James Lee, club and sub of Travis View. Frank Trigg, a little slow, kind of boring. The most boring fight on the card for sure. Not really his fault. And then you had Joachim Hansen with his beautiful samurai armbar, if you will, of Jason Ireland. So, I mean, all in all, this was a pretty darn good card. What did you think of it?
Yeah, it was good stuff. It's a good way to end to sort of end Pride. You know, a lot of fun fights. Right, only one that I would say. You know, there's a couple that are kind of quick and don't have a whole lot to them. Only one that gets a little boring. A lot of big epic moments, a lot of major things, a lot of reasons to watch, and a lot of things that I think are cool. You know, as is sort of, you know, the case with these shows that we revisit here, there's a lot of things that I think as a modern fan are really cool to go back and take a look at and see kind of, you know, the genesis of these guys, see what Shogun was like in his absolute prime, see what Reem was like back in his weird 205 days, see what, you know, see what the, you know, lightweight division looked like at a time when there really wasn't a tremendous UFC lightweight division to speak of just yet. It's cool to go back and look at these things, and I think this is a you know, a neat moment in UFC or in MMA history, excuse me, and a really just good, entertaining card.
Yeah, definitely one for the ages. I mean, if you have the time, it's only like a 3-hour card. Go watch it. The whole event is on Fight Pass. It's definitely worth it. I know a lot of people are off of work and school for the holidays. Go check this card out. You will definitely not be disappointed.
Agreed.
Well, that's our show, man. Thank you guys for tuning in. Thank you, Fraser, for joining me as always.
Absolutely.
You can find Fraser on Twitter at FCoffeine. You can find me on Twitter at The Eddie Mercado. Read us both over at bloodyelbow.com. If you like the show, please give us the thumbs up. That's the find it somewhere down below the video there, floating around. Subscribe. That would also help us out a bunch. That's MMANation.com, DOTCOM. That is our YouTube channel. Do us another favor and whitelist us on your ad blockers because you love us that much and you want to keep this content free and regular. Also, there's no UFC or Bellator this weekend. However, Pride never dies. There will be a Risen card on the 29th and the 31st. There's 3 different tournaments going on. You got Crow Cop taking on TK, Tsuyoshi Kosaka. Also some old school Pride heads there. And Gomi is fighting on that card, as we mentioned earlier. Not happy about the Gomi part, but all the other bouts should be pretty exciting. So, yeah, other than that, Fraser and I will be back on New Year's Day, January 1st, 2018, for the very first Affliction card, Banned, which was Tom Atencio's promotion. He went from selling T-shirts to putting on his own brand of mixed martial arts, which was actually pretty exciting. So definitely look forward to that. Fraser, thank you so much for joining me.
Absolutely. Thank you very much.
You got any final thoughts or any plugs or anything you want to say to anybody?
No, just Affliction coming up. Two-part series. The complete Affliction. It's going to be great, and it's a fitting transition from the end of Pride to the very short-lived life of Affliction. That's going to be exciting. So for any fans who want to, again, you got some time off, go watch those Affliction cards, and then come chat with us about them.
Yeah, absolutely. And we might be back on this Sunday, New Year or Christmas Eve, for a special show. Maybe, maybe not. We'll find out. But until then, go be a good person.